Hi everyone, welcome to this really great INNS webinar. I'm really much looking forward to that because that's our annual INNS webinar. So every year we are identifying one of the most important topics and speakers from our community to speak to the community and everyone else interested. And today it will be Wlodzislaw or Włodek Duch. And before I want to head over to Włodek, I want to introduce a bit to this topic because this year, 2024, marks actually a very exciting year. Not only in general, many things, nice things happen, also bad things, but I will not go to those now. Specifically for the International Neural Network Society, in short INNS, this has now been a year where two Nobel Prizes were in a way devoted to neural network researchers. And the first very prominent research is here from Geoffrey Hinton and John Hopfield in the area of physics. So the physics Nobel Prize was given to researchers who were part of the starting of the era of computing in neural networks. And we're really happy that some of the founders or of the first researchers in that area were awarded with the Nobel Prize. And similarly, other researchers, more younger in a way, have made great contributions in the area of chemistry, and half of the Nobel Prize in chemistry was awarded to researchers at DeepMind who helped creating algorithms, and they were really much also mentioning it's the whole team who helped creating these algorithms for AlphaFold and so on. But now we want to look a bit more critical behind, and that's a bit the motivation of today's talk. In the story which the Nobel website shows, there is like this story, this roadmap. I will not go into the details of how it went to the Nobel Prize in physics, but they mentioned, for example, during the 1990s, many researchers lost interest in ANN, but Hinton was one of those who continued to work in the field. And that sounds a little bit like nothing was really going on and only very few people worked. Though, if we look carefully, and we will hear much more from Włodek in a while, there was actually a lot going on. Maybe not so much in the Anglosphere, but in other countries, there was a lot of research going on. And there are quite a few other great minds who influenced the research towards neural networks. And I've been personally also discussing with Geoff Hinton, and he also mentioned many other people during some of the seminars and speeches. And I also have discussed with other colleagues. And before I head over to Włodek, just want to mention Jürgen Schmidt, who was very critical, even saying the Nobel Prize in physics for Hopfield and Hinton turns out to be a Nobel Prize for plagiarism. And then he actually made a quite nice website, The Annotated History of Modern AI and Deep Learning. And what I specifically like is not only many other great minds are highlighted, some of them probably Włodek will also come to, but also this, before kind of publishing this research, he shared it with many of the colleagues. More than 500 colleagues looked into that and gave their feedback before he finally published that work. So I think it's also quite a nice reference to look into. But where are the roots? I'm not here to talk about all of that now. Better is to have someone who actually was more or less in the journey from the beginning. So born in Poland and also coming from the area of physics, Włodek Duch actually had a similar transition through several fields, the physical background, trying to understand how neural network works. And he also published in that year, which was mentioned by Nobel Committee as the dark winters in the 1990s. Here, back in 1992, he published already work in modeling neural networks, a physicist's point of view. So quite nice to see from that mindset who was having a similar development and understanding of what happened in the community during that time to get that overview of the history of deep learning from you. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And you also mentioned, of course, now you're a full professor, you will maybe mention something more about your own career. You also mentioned that you are actually have done research, quite a lot of research in various areas. So you have a really not a narrow one directional mindset, but you have a broad overview of many areas, including meta-learning or understanding, or even the attempt to create neural models of memetics and conspiracy theories. So I'm really much looking forward to hear now from you, Wojtek, how or where are the roots in AI and deep learning, and where will we go to? Please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for this nice introduction, and thank you very much to the society that I was very much connected with, especially through our Society of European Neural Networks, which I was heading for about 6 years altogether, organizing lots of conferences. So I'm going to talk about the reason why neural networks got Nobel Prize in physics and why you haven't got that. So this is maybe Nobelization or Nobelization of neural networks, that now everybody wants to use neural networks. So I'll talk about the roots, but I won't really go through the whole history. That's a topic for another maybe lecture. And I'll at the end mention the insane future of neural networks, because this is going to be really insane future quite soon. So let's see, I can't. So this is the way. This is the way to Nobel Prizes. I will talk about the roots, and this is the Ising model. Or as he is called in US, Ising, spin glasses, Hopfield associative memory networks. And the reason why Hopfield was widely recognized in physics community, and then also his model was widely recognized. And I will mention then the Boltzmann creative machines and deep neural networks. And that is the part where Geoffrey Hinton also had great contributions. And then I will mention also the applications like protein folding, and that's why Hasabi's got his Nobel Prize. And in the end, I've just mentioned a few other things that neural networks are good for, and the large language model agents and what is going on in this field. So as you know, it's very active, and if you look at the archive CSAI, every week it's over 1,000 papers. So we just can see the tip of the iceberg. It's impossible now to make an overview of what is going on and how we got to this point. I have a nice aggregation of all this news on my Flipboard. If I find something interesting, I just put it there, and it's a very nice way of reminding myself what is worth looking at. So, as you know, John Hopfield and Geoffrey Hinton got the Nobel Prize. Hopfield network model of associative memory and optimization problem that was quoted, and Hinton discovery of backpropagation and deep networks in 2015, training algorithms and other models. And the theory of complex systems that people have been working on in physics actually is now a mixture of computer science, neural networks, machine learning, lots of other things, some biology, etc. Everything becomes really intertwined. So just to start from these deep roots, 100 years ago, Wilhelm Lenz, who was in Hamburg, had a student called Lenz-Ising. And he gave him the problem of understanding how some materials become ferromagnetic. When you have an iron and you magnetize that, suddenly it just becomes, well, magnetic. So still, after 100 years, when the Ising has published his thesis in 1924, there are about 800 papers every year which are based on this model each year. So this was very simple, and I'll in this part of the lecture I will mention a few equations, but that's just a few slides, so don't go away. a model of ferromagnetism in statistical mechanics is very simple. We just assume that there are these magnetic moments or spins, and that the elements that have these magnetic moments, at that time they did not know about the spins. They just were talking about micromagnets. That they are kind of magnetic dipole moments, and they interact. And the interaction that Ising has assumed was very simple. The neighbors are interacting, so we have a sum over I plus 1, and the values of the spins, which could be up and down, so it's binary. And then we have one coupling constant. The one-dimensional ferromagnetic moment model with all these coupling constants positive and the same was solved in the thesis of Ising in 1924. They've published a paper a year later. There is no phase transition. It's not very interesting. So there is a nice paper written by the grandson of Ising, Thomas Ising, with a few other guys about the fate of Ernst Ising and the fate of his model, which you can find in the archives here. So I have lots of these links that you can see here, because you can look at the presentation slides that I have on my page, and you can display it also at INNS page, and then can follow some of the links, because we don't have that much time to talk about everything in detail. This model became very influential. In 1944, Lars Onsager solved this model analytically for the two-dimensional square lattice without external magnetic field. And this was the simplest model in which you could observe the phase transitions. So he wrote a paper on crystal statistics, two-dimensional model with an order-disorder transition. Lars Onsager got the Nobel Prize in 1968 for well, his discovery in chemistry. This solution of the Ising model was also mentioned, but his primary discoveries were related to other things. But lots of other very famous physicists like Wolfgang Pauli, Perls, Kramer, Wannier, Potts, and many others have worked on these two-dimensional model variants. And then also the three-dimensional Ising model was really attacked by lots of physicists. I knew some of them who have spent many, many years trying to find analytical solutions of the three-dimensional Ising model. But that so far has not really been successful. So the next step was, well, we had this two-dimensional solution, and then Philip Anderson thought about much more complex systems, like the well, systems that he called the spin glasses. That is a mixture of the, for example, copper and manganium, which then will introduce some ferromagneticity into the material, but the theory of the electronic structure of magnetic and disordered systems was very difficult. It was characterized, materials of this sort, by randomness, and it was very hard to compute any kind of physical properties from this kind of systems. So Edwards and Anderson wrote the first paper on the theory of spin glasses in 1975, and the spin glass random Heisenberg Hamiltonian was also very simple. You just look at the interactions between the spins, and you have these coefficients which could be now negative or positive, and the spins are still binary plus minus 1. So this was generalized in many different ways. For example, Potts has thought about, instead of having the binary values, just to put that on the circle. So you have several values of the spins. This is called the Potts model. Such models had many applications in econophysics, sociophysics, evolution of language, tumor modeling, seismic hazard assessment, volatility in financial markets, mood swings, scientific collaboration, evaluation, voting, political polarization, lots of things. Actually, a few months ago, we just had a kind of a review paper on the Ising model celebrates a century of interdisciplinary contributions, and this is in NPJ complexity, and it just talks about all these different applications. So now what happened is that people started to see how to solve this numerically in more difficult situations. And this idea that we can use physics to do the computation became very influential. That is, we want to prepare the states of different systems in such a way that the evolution will bring us to some interesting solutions. So quantum computers, quantum annealers, hardware neural networks, electronic devices, reservoir computers, and recently also implementation by photonics and superconducting qubits and nanomagnetic Nia arrays, spintronics, lots of different things. So if you look into the Nature Communication, for example, or some Nature physics papers, you find that there is plenty of papers where people try to find alternatives to the digital computing. And this is the time evolution of physical systems should perform the, different operations that will help us in speech and image recognition very quickly. And solve optimization problem. So one thing that is actually quite popular at the moment is the coherent Ising machines. And these are hardware solvers that simulate the Ising model and find optimal solutions to all kinds of combinatorial problems. And they have been applied in many fields now. And especially the paper that came out in 21 has shown that you can take the 100,000 spin coherent Ising machine and create a kind of optical solution. Very interesting. You can, not see too much here, but they have a kind of a ring with kilometers of fiber optics. And then they are sending pulses and modulating the pulses so that they are going to create a kind of qubits. And they had 1,000 times faster solutions than those obtained with the best supercomputers. So in future, and there are several papers going in this direction, like speed up coherent Ising machine with a spiking neural network, and universal quantum computations using quantum annealing with the transverse field using Hamiltonian, etc. In the future, maybe some of this will lead us to, more universal computing systems, which are based on physical principles. And so the coherent Ising machine, as you see, the number of papers is growing very quickly, and somebody is just painting my screen, unfortunately. From spin glasses, then Anderson in '88 was writing about the spin glasses that lead to new ideas in optimization, neuroscience, statistical mechanics. In 1975, Sherrington and Kirkpatrick have formulated interesting model with long-range ferro and anti-ferromagnetic couplings. And then this idea of how to average the state of the complex disordered systems was discussed, and the mean field approximation invented. And then states of spin glasses at low temperature are very complex. That's because physics like ergodic systems, that is the systems that are going to, in the thermodynamics, they are going to create all kinds of microstates, and you can average over that. But these systems are not like that. They're non-ergodic. Calculation of the function that is fundamental to calculate properties of systems like that, which is called the partition function, because it shows how the energy is partitioned into different microstates, was very difficult. And Sam Edwards have invented in 1971 a trick called replica trick that simplifies such calculations. So Giorgio Parisi has extended that to the symmetry breaking scheme, which was very useful for the calculation of properties of such systems. And he's got the Nobel Prize just 3 years ago. 3 years ago, Nobel Prize in Physics for the discovery of the interplay of disorder and fluctuation in physical systems from atomic to planetary scales. So now we had this Sherrington-Kirkpatrick model, and it was similar to the Hopfield model, but it just had random initialization. So you see, this was the background. Now, Hopfield was a statistical physicist. He just looked at that, and he had this nice idea how to initialize the coupling to create patterns of local minima that could be used as the memory states. And so now we're moving after this little background in physics. Now we are moving to the reason why the Nobel Prize was in physics, and why this work has really been grounded in what lots of physicists knew about, at least those who studied statistical physics. So in '82, Hopfield wrote this famous paper on neural networks and physical systems with emergent collective computational abilities in the PNAS. And actually, I've heard his his talk when he was complaining that he could not publish this paper anywhere, because in the beginning of 80s, people were not very much interested in neural networks. And the neuroscientists thought that this is so simple that it cannot be useful. And then, physicists also thought, well, it's not very useful because there is no application, etc. And so he finally could not publish this paper in other journals, but he was on the board of editors of PNAS. And so he has published that in the journal he was editing. This paper presented spin network with binary activation functions like Ising model with couplings that encode information in the network energy landscape. And it has about 28,000 citations by now. Then 2 years later, he extended that to the neurons with gradient response function, which is also fairly popular. And it became a standard model to study neural networks through statistical mechanics. And then also to implement it in electronic hardware. In the first papers that I've mentioned, he already was writing about the hardware implementation and analog computations based on that. So we all know that it's based on the fully connected network with the nodes which have symmetric weights. And then there is the energy function that you can use here, and you have to learn how to adjust the weights or the couplings, as the physicists call that, to create local minima. And the inference requires that we will just read the final state, because this system is going to evolve into a minimum. This is from the Nobel Prize site where they have published this kind of picture. You see, we initialize that, and then it evolves and ends up in some minimum state. And to reach the minimum update, we just have to compute the combination of signals coming to the node. And you all know this because you are the experts on that, so I'll not dwell much on this. But we know that it has one global minimum, which is related to weights if you set them as just products. So for n neurons, you will have the minimum energy, which is the minus n squared. And then you can store the patterns because you can average the weights which are created by kind of a Hebb rule, looking at which neurons are collaborating or which neurons are active together. So Hebb rule says that neurons that fire together would wire together, that justifies the averaging. The problem with this was that the memory capacity of this kind of systems was rather low, about 14% of the number of neurons. It also, people could look at the landscape and phase diagram, and you could see that there are 4 phases here. There is a stable phase, there is a shallow local phase, there are a few broad minima. This is something that corresponded to spin glass phase, and there was the complete one global minimum paramagnetic part, etc. There are lots of very nice explanation how this model worked, and it's now more relevant than it ever has been. And that's because there have been several papers, starting from the Krotov and Hopfield paper from 2016, where they've been discussing the dense associative memory for pattern recognition. And this was in the NIPS, presented at the NIPS conference. And then there was in 2020 the modern Hopfield network and attention for immune repertoire classification, for example. And then Ramsauer in 21 had a very nice paper with 15 co-authors, and it was called Hopfield Network is All You Need. Indeed, this paper is really just opening new possibilities for the Hopfield kind of models. They call it modern Hopfield networks with continuous states and update rule. And they could show that this update rule in the modern Hopfield network is actually equivalent to the attention mechanism that is used in transformers, in transformer architecture. and that can store exponentially many patterns, retrieve the patterns with a one update, and have exponentially small retrieval errors. Very interesting. And the original idea of Krotov and Hopfield was just to change the exponent in the energy function, which was just the first step towards what is now the modern Hopfield network. And now we have several really fantastic papers on the universal Hopfield networks, a general framework for single-shot associative memory models. Then we have the symbiosis of deep learning and differential equations, a universal abstraction for hierarchical Hopfield network paper, and then a very important paper last year, energy transformer, which was also presented at NIPS. And they have presented also a framework for hierarchical Hopfield networks. So this year, there was also the next step, the sparse and structured Hopfield networks. So Hopfield networks are alive and doing very well and worth really coming back to. And as you know, they had also some applications in neuroscience. The recent paper of Englert and his 10 co-authors is on the connectome-based attractor dynamics that underlie brain activity in rest, task, and disease. And this is about the model of functional connectome based on Hopfield network that computes activity flows through the network of brain regions. Again, very interesting applications. Gustafsson had in 2022 the paper on artificial Alzheimer visualization of the process of memory decay and confusion. And actually, this application to the Alzheimer and dementia has been fairly popular. In the past, we had a number of interesting papers estimating memory deterioration rates following neurodegeneration and traumatic brain injuries in Hopfield networks. And I've even written in 2007 myself a paper on computational models of dementia and neurological problems. And I've been invited by the psychiatrists to talk about that, and they've been very interested. They said that what they do is not science. They just give people drugs and look at the effects, and we try to understand what is really happening in the brain. So they were hoping that we'll be successful and will make, as the head of the psychiatry group here said, that in the end, psychiatry will become real science. Very interesting. Okay, so this was the Hopfield networks, and then the other trend that has been even started even earlier than the Hopfield network was this idea of neural feed-forward classifiers. And that may be traced back to the pandemonium model of Selfridge in 1959, where he talked about, well, how to decompose first the images or the information and decompose it in such a way that we just create the features. So it's like with the convolutional network, we just define the layer with the features, and then we try to recompose that. So the cognitive demons will just look at these feature demons, and whoever is shouting louder, that is sending the stronger signal, is recognizing that these elements are in the picture. This was actually the idea to have invariant object classification, regression, and recognition, and then it could be trained to recognize many patterns, and the network extracting features will just have to be created in such a way that we have to find the parameters, the weights, the connections that actually will just discover the features and then combine them into something that recognizes the objects. So of course, now we have these multi-layer deep networks, and we have convolutional subsampling and the just normal layers to train the system. But what really started the avalanche in this direction was the paper by Rummel, Hart, Hinton, and Williams in '86, Learning Representations by Backpropagation Error. Actually, Hinton's idea was that he really wanted to learn representations, how the information is represented in the networks. And of course, you may quarrel about who was the first, and that before that, this idea of backpropagation was present in some papers, etc. But the fact is that this paper in Nature has started the avalanche of lots of other activity and research related to this kind of work. So also the chapter in the connectionist book, this was 80s, was the time of the connectionist development. And this was done by psychologists. Rumelhart, Hinton, and Williams had a paper in the parallel distributed processing book by McClelland and Rumelhart on the learning internal representation of error by error propagation. So this stress on internal representation was present from the beginning, actually. And then also the paper by Krzyzewski, Sutskever, and Hinton on ImageNet, showing that the deep convolutional neural networks can really be very useful in 2012 was one of the big steps forward. It was cited 165,000 times so far. The other paper by LeCun, Bengio, and Hinton on deep learning and nature also was very influential. So this was the influence which really started the whole interest in neural networks, multi-layer systems, and initially the multi-layer perceptrons were just based on simple functions layer by layer. All the layers were just with the weights that could be trained, and it had much better convergence properties than using just polynomial functions because of the sigmoidal functions. So people could prove lots of theorems about the efficiency of that. Okay, so when we have networks of this sort, Hopfield network could remember episodes and patterns, but we wanted to have something that will learn the semantic memory, stable kind of representations, and these were latent representations. So the networks might extract different features, and then they have to transform that through many layers, and these layers finally have some kind of latent representation of information, which is a compressed representation. The brain has about 100 trillion synapses, which could be, well, compared to the weights. The sensory inputs will lead to trains of spikes. The spikes will lead to recurrent activation of groups of neurons, and this leads to spreading activations through neural networks. So our large language models, for example, have 1-2 trillion parameters at most, so still much smaller than what the brain has. But the brain has to maintain all this because of the biological restrictions, and the electronics doesn't have this kind of restrictions. So we can have networks with adjustable parameters with many layers, and then we train the parameters and recognize and have the output decisions. So one thing that people have applied that to was to look at the images, and the first layer could be just the edges and kind of well, structures that the primary visual cortex has. It's I mean, the discovery that what the primary visual cortex does is this columns which specialize in discovery of different features, and then you see that the layers that we have in the networks will try to recompose that into parts of the, let's say, face in this case, and finally we have the neurons in our inferotemporal cortex, which will react to complex shapes, etc. But that is all invariant in many ways. And so people thought, okay, we can now recognize things, but feed-forward neural networks, which have lots of applications, are just trying to recognize particular patterns, while we know from classical AI approach that sometimes constraint satisfaction gives us a better ability to describe the whole categories of different objects that allow for construction of internal generative models at higher abstraction level. And there is lots of work now on how to actually create internal representations that will be at higher abstraction level. So one important paper here was the paper by Oakley, Hinton, and Zajnowski in '85 on learning algorithms for Boltzmann machines. Again, we have a link to the physics here because, of course, Ludwig Boltzmann was one of the greatest physicists who was the founder of the statistical physics. And the idea was that if we had some randomness to computations, we can actually discover the probability distribution that will generalize memory patterns and create internal representation of data. So again, we had something like Hopfield network with hidden units and then stochastic exploration. And there was a layer which was the input layer, and there was this reservoir layer here. And one could actually compute the probability of transitioning between the internal states. And then to compute the amount, let's say, of the energy that is connected to each microstate, we have to normalize this function. If you just sum over all the states here, we have this normalization factor to get the probability, which are 1. And this is called the partition function again. And this partition function is like in case of the functions that Parisi was calculating and a few others, as I mentioned. The update state of the neuron is, again, like in case of Hopfield, it's just the weights and the quadratic form. And the probability based on energy difference for the binary neurons has been given by sigmoidal functions. So we've got nicely the explanation why sigmoidal functions are important. And then the Boltzmann machines allowed us to calculate probability using this function. And then people have been generating the random number and finding whether we should update that, although the energy was sometimes increased, but sometimes decreased. So there was this exploration. But what was nice about Boltzmann machines is that in the paper of Sejnowski and Hinton, they found that the good way of training them is by contrastive learning, that is changing probability of one pattern that will influence the partition function. We had to look at this probability and maximize joint probability of training on a set of data vectors. And this partition function could be simplified or rather changed into this log P, and minimization of partition function will increase energy of spurious states. And so this will make a larger contrast between the states, the memory states, and the spurious states in the network. Calculation of gradients will lead to contrastive Hebbian rule, which actually had a very simple form. That is, you had to estimate the average of the correlations when you show the data and estimate the average of the correlation when the system was just running spontaneously with the random inputs. And this will allow you to define the rule, how to update your weights. So you have to clamp inputs, run network, and look at these averages, and the weights will actually be interpreted as this is the real correlation, and this is a kind of a dreaming, and you run starting from random inputs. Okay. To simplify that, the restricted Boltzmann machines have been introduced, and they have only input hidden unit connection. All this has been very useful, and it actually is a kind of subspecies or subtypes of more general kind of dynamical systems, which are the attractor networks. So in the Hopfield network, the system would settle in point attractor. In Boltzmann machines, the attractors are much more complex, and they could be blended states, cyclic or stochastic states, and different kinds of attractors are discussed in theoretical neuroscience, of course, and that includes various types of memory, perception, and motor action. There was a very nice book by Daniel Amit in 1992, Modeling Brain Function, the World of Attractor Neural Networks. So all this has contributed to better models also in neuroscience, and thoughts may be regarded as chains of transitions between such attractor states, short metastable synchronized states, and attractor networks may help to explain why some information may become memes or the units of cultural information. It's interesting that memetics has died in the natural sciences. It's just still used in the investigation of culture phenomena. But actually, I think we can try to link that to the attractor networks, and I've tried to do that in this paper on memetics and neural models of conspiracy theories. So where did that lead us? Well, the work on internal representation ended up with the several models that have actually worked on the same principle as the neural networks initially. That is, decompose things, compress them in the latent space, and then decompress them back. And this decompression will not be very similar to the original, but it will just use the distributions which will describe the whole category of similar objects. So the generative adversarial networks, the GANs, have been invented in 2014. Then the variational autoencoders in 22, the flow-based models in 2019, but just got much more popular a few years later. The fusion models in 2015. So we have many of these models that actually can compress data, create latent representation, and then decompress them in slightly similar way, but the whole thing is based on the algorithmic information with low complexity that allows us to create the interesting latent representation. So, of course, I don't have time to talk about the generative AI, but this type of models allowed us to create lots of different systems, which are very popular now, to generate all kinds of things, like images, like videos, like melodies. And these things, well, are now a matter of commercial, let's say, auctions. For example, in 2018, Christie has sold this portrait of Edmond de Bellamy for more than $400,000. Then the theater, the Opera Spatiale, got the first prize, was the winner of digital art at the Colorado State. And people who don't know that it was produced by AI, well, very much impressed. But once they know it's AI, then of course they will say, no, this is not an art at all. Just very recently, we had this auction in Sotheby where the portrait of Alan Turing, made by this robot who actually is doing the physical painting, it's not just the image, has been sold for $1.32 million. So all this is coming, and this is what generative art came up with. But we don't have time to talk about that. Another important and interesting thing is that, well, in biology, function follows structure, and then structure is also molded by function somehow. So when we look at the networks in the brain, we see that they're very sparse. The physical connections between two different groups of neurons will be at the level of tenths of a percent, less than 1%. But functional connectivity, because it may be connected through several intermediate steps, is much higher, between 1% and 5%. There is a very interesting paper from the MIT group on the geometry of concepts, sparse and colder feature structure, and then the newer one, growing brains, co-emergence of anatomical and functional modularity in recurrent neural networks, and also another paper, generalization from starvation, hints of universality in large language model knowledge, graph learning. So in this case, this kind of brain-inspired modular training, as they call it, is used to solve a set of compositional cognitive tasks, many different, 84 different tasks, and the network will grow finally something which is not just the functional network, but also which acquires step by step a kind of modular structure. I think this is a very interesting direction that could connect us more to biology. So One more remark about this internal representation, which are really very important. People sometimes been criticizing that all these models that we have are just working because of superficial statistics, but maybe they try to create a coherent, grounded models of reality and neural representation. One paper that have shown that is on this Othello GPT. This is the model in which people try to teach a small, relatively small neural network with few tens of hundreds of millions of parameters, how to play Othello. The system has just seen a sequence of movements, pure text and sequence of movements. And then they try to, once it was trained and it could play quite well, then they try to see how is the game derived from the sequence of movements represented internally. And they found that the internal board representation, that the internal representation has emerged, and it has a certain structure of a real board. The system hasn't seen this board, so you can say that network plays Othello a bit like human. It keeps the game in its neural network mind's eye somehow. Using the model, it learns to make strategic good movements. So the GPT is perceiving what appears in its imagery, so to say. Very interesting example showing that the networks may actually form kind of internal models. And of course, this is connected to now the most popular kind of systems, which are the deep networks and then the transformers. First, you have to embed the objects that you want to represent, like words, for example, in Word2Vec or any other embedding approach. And then the transformer model has been published in 2017 in the paper "Attention is All You Need." And that started this generative AI area too. So I won't talk about this because you all know this idea of transformers, but this is where we have moved from the simple feed-forward networks and then even deep networks into more complex architectures called transformers in this case, which are now dominating in many applications because the generative pre-trained transformers or GPTs are now the most popular types of neural networks. And the attention is given to sequence of tokens and the relations between these tokens. And I just wanted to remind you that a long time ago we had Hecht Nielsen at one of the INNS conferences who talked about confabulation architecture, and he talked about this kind of system that can predict the next word, but at that time, without the attention architecture, it was just falling apart after a few sentences because it starts to produce nonsense. So in this case, the attention is very important, and GPT are the networks that contain lots of knowledge, but they contain this knowledge because they can, in the huge space of many parameters that they have, they can spread the activation, and the generative AI will just bind relevant information from different tokens, and the tokens are embedded, of course, in numerical spaces, and the relation between tokens will give them the meaning or in different contexts. So people have tried to do that by verbal description, and there was this huge project such as Psych, where lots of concepts have been described in details. But there are so many different contexts that it's impossible to describe that in a verbal way. There are very nice now, sites that actually illustrate this spreading activation mechanism also in networks. So how does it work? Well, first you have to find the big library, maybe 10,000 gigabytes of text, and people are able to read about 1,000 books in their lifetime, but here the system can look at the end of the library and find something that can be associated with something which is here, which I will never do because I haven't read all this, right? And once you compress the information by using lots of the GPU time and lots of money to do that, out of 1,000 gigabytes, you may have a zip file with about 70 gigabytes. And the more you compress that, the more, well, associations will be created, but some of them are obviously errors, which we call hallucinations. But that allows for greater creativity. So in case of Llama 2, for example, the compression is about 143 times. And the stronger the compression, the more unusual associations you can get, and the more errors, of course. So the parameter, which we call the temperature, will control somehow how these associations are created, whether they should be very similar to what you really found in the original text or whether they should be very distant. One picture that is now generated by these systems will cost you about 10 watt-hours, which is something that you need to charge your smartphone, or about 1/4 of a cent. So it's not so much. People are complaining that AI is using so much energy, but this is mostly for data centers, social networks, and other things like that. Only a small percentage of this is used for the AI systems, while people are using much more for computer games, for example, because few billions of people are just using computer games every year. So cognition may be viewed as a kind of a compression and creating internal representations. Machine learning model selection is based on algorithmic information theory. We have many variants like minimum length encoding, description length, run length encoding, message length, etc. There is a whole field called the model selection, which is just focused on that. And language learning and all cognition may be viewed as a kind of a compression of information. So we have episodic memory where we just remember things after single exposures. And then hippocampus is the main structure responsible for that, encoding episodic memories. It has small capacity, though. It has less than 100 million neurons in humans. And the cortex is about 160 times more larger. And so we have to actually transform what has been learned and then preserve the compressed version or the gist of what we have learned. A flood of images, conversations, and text, etc., requires compression. And after compression, we just, create semantic memory, but also create a kind of cues that allow us to partially recall things. So knowledge is internalized and associations become automatic. And large language models basically will contain only compressed memories and will not record the precise episodes. So what happened after this compression? People now try to create the explainable AI, the XAI, and there are many experiments showing how this compressed information is really represented. What's the internal representation of this information? One interesting experiment with Anthropic Claude 3 has shown that if you ask about immunology, you find the activation patterns in many different contexts. And if you visualize that, you see that the system tries to use a certain groups of the parameters or the neurons to represent concepts in very specific context. So long time ago, we tried to use computational intelligence methods for understanding of data and data structures. Now we try to use these methods for opening the AI black box, that is to look at what is inside these kind of systems. And one way of doing that is that we try to convert it to code. We used to try to convert what neural networks are doing to kind of logical rules, or at least fuzzy rules. Now the people try to convert what happens in the black box into a code because this is much more complex, of course. So now we have a series of these models which have been growing, multimodal systems that is trained on all kinds of data at the same time, not just on the text and vision separately, but we have systems that have been trained on many different modalities of data. And Anthropic Claude 3, Google Gemini, and several GPT versions, etc., have been trained in this way. So we have now systems which can go up to maybe 2 trillion of parameters. And this was just recently, that is just last year, maybe the major direction. We just scaled things up, hoping that this is going to become more and more intelligent. And indeed, we have now many families, let's say. If you look at the list of these major large models, the LLM model org has 141 that I just checked, and that's 42 large-scale open source models. And Hugging Face has a leaderboard with lots of these models, and most popular large language models and large multimodal models are from this Google DeepMind, OpenAI, Meta, NVIDIA. The Chinese Alibaba Qwen model is very influential. Mistral is the European French model. Falcon is this, United Arab Emirates. And then there is a series now of small language models from IBM, like Granite, from Microsoft, like 5, 3, 4 now, Google Gamma and Mistral, etc. So when we've looked at the benchmarks, it appeared that the big models are doing much better than the small ones. And initially, the benchmarks were on fairly simple ideas, etc. But now there is a graduate level Google proof QA&A benchmark, which simply means that this is something like 460 very difficult problems which cannot be easily solved. There is no information in the internet, so it was never seen by the system. 448 extremely difficult questions that require a PhD expert and long work to solve them. And the non-expert validators have reached about 34% accuracy after more than 30 minutes of search also in the web access and trying to solve it themselves. The PhDs who are experts in the domain of these problems have reached the values between 65 and 74. This is because they were allowed to correct some errors, but still 74. Now, we have the GPT-4o1 system that actually in this benchmark is reaching about 78%. So these are the hardest benchmarks in science. And we find that, well, we are now being left behind by the new models. And these new models are now not just the associative kind of networks that we had, but also the networks that can reason a bit. So there are other kind of benchmarks where you see that the bigger the system, the better the results. But there are also these small language models, like GPT-4 has about 1.76 trillion parameters, and GPT-4o, which is just 8 billion of parameters, may show fairly similar results in many domains. So, for example, in mathematics, this GPT-4o is doing almost as well as GPT-4o, the big model, which has been distilled from GPT-4. And in many other benchmarks, actually, small models are showing now much better results. So this idea that scaling is going to solve everything is probably not working as well, and that's why people are focusing on small models, which you can run on your computer, but they have been trained on good data and more specialized. They may not know 1,000 languages, but they may know everything in your domain of expertise. So lots of these small models are coming. Microsoft has just released the 5.4. IBM, this Granite models, etc. So having these tools now, we could attempt to do very ambitious things. And this brings us to the second Nobel Prize, which is in chemistry. And this was the prize for the protein chemistry, basically. So two guys, Baker and Jumper, are the experts in proteins, and the Amis Hassabis started from neuroscience. And for the first 10 years of his life, he was just working on the neuroscience. And then he thought, well, maybe some things are too difficult. It will be easier to create a machine that will do the work for us. That's what I read in the interview with him. So one shocking thing was in 2016, DeepMind, which the company he started, has shown that you can win in Go by having a system which has been based on neural networks. But in 2017, the more, let's say, shocking thing was that, the AlphaGo still knew a lot about the Go because humans had extensive knowledge and strategies. But the AlphaGo Zero actually was just playing with itself without any strategy and any information from humans. And as a result, it could reach the superhuman level. First, and it could beat the Lee Sedol in 4 out of 5 games. And then it could lead also Kedjie, and this was this Sputnik moment in China, as they called it. Kai-Fu Lee, in his great book, actually wrote about Sputnik moment in China, when they saw that this can really be very intelligent in playing Go. And AlphaGo Zero actually could be trained initially on human strategies, and then it did not really reach such a high level. But when it invented its own strategies, it could really reach the superhuman level, which the human knowledge has only decreased or prevented to develop. And the shocking news this year was that that people could reach the grandmaster level chess without any search. So these systems still do lots of Monte Carlo kind of a search with the heuristics, which are based on the neural networks. But it appeared that if you have already a system from which you can learn, you can just observe the patterns and then just associate the patterns with the, best moves that the well-trained systems do. It's a kind of like blitz in chess. And so the system with 270 million parameters and transformer model could make one-step intuitive decisions without any search, which means that it can play any kind of a blitz, and it really is at a very high grandmaster level. So what DeepMind have done after AlphaGo, of course, they created lots of strategic games like AlphaStar, which was playing the StarCraft 2, etc. Much more complex open games where you have lots of different figures and strategies and the objects that you can use for playing the game, and complex system, complex board, let's say, and that also have been used in many other domains that many people don't realize. For example, we have now chips in our computers which are based on tensor processing units, and now the neural processing units, etc., which have been created using the Alpha chip acceleration program, which is able to do the superhuman chip layouts and development of hardware. So that's also something that came out from DeepMind. And then, of course, the protein folding, which was the main reason they got the Nobel Prize, because for many years, actually, I had some students who were also involved in this kind of a competition for protein folding. And up till 2016, the success rate was very moderate. About 40% of the structures could be folded reasonably well. And then the AlphaFold in 2018 came, and it was already almost 60%, and the AlphaFold 2 was almost 90%. So this is a very complex program. which actually requires a lot of domain knowledge. So it shows that it's not just the neural network and the algorithms that we have been developing. It is the domain knowledge that is necessary to actually do something in the real life or real life applications. So Google DeepMind has released about 218 million of the three-dimensional protein structures. And in the experiments, people have done before about 100,000 of these protein structures. And there are many techniques to do this. Crystallography is one of them now. There is a special kind of microscopy that can also be helpful. Very expensive, long-term, etc. And the AlphaFold architecture in this case required close collaboration with protein experts, and they have been using evolutionary information from lots of genetic databases, lots of different species, and looking at how this looks like in different organisms, and then comparing pairing metrics to experimentally derived structures, etc. So there was the evolution former, which evaluates importance of position in sequences and in sequences of similar species, etc. I mean, I have some more slides on how complex this system is, but I don't want to really spend much time on that. As you know, now we have the AlphaFold 3, which has just been published a few years ago, and then greatly improved just this year. It's a big collaboration, and it can predict the structure and interaction of all kinds of molecules which will interact with the organic structures built from proteins. We have also the Alpha Proteo, which generates novel proteins for biology and health. And this is accelerating research in lots of different biology, molecular medicine areas. And if you look at the number of AI molecules that have been now designed or adapted to different applications, it's growing every year. So it looks like this really has a lot of influence on the medicine now. So all this brings us to a very large-scale consortium. So seeing what is happening, some countries and some companies started to really build the competence. One interesting idea is this trillion parameter consortium. And this is to build, train, and use large-scale models and hardware development. This was announced this March. AI development, scalable libraries and workflows and data aggregation, etc. RIKEN, which is the Japanese research institution, plans to launch this program, and they have pages now which actually has been transformative research innovation platform, artificial general intelligence for science. And they are focused on multimodal foundation models of dynamic behavior, a spatial transcriptome, mostly on this genomic protein level, but also neural activities and phenotypes and other things like that. So that's one very big consortium, and RIKEN tries to create foundation models for all kinds of drug development, medical approaches. They also have been working on robotics biology that will be the humanoid kind of robots that will help in laboratory work for genomics, cell cultures, cell-based screening, proteomics, metabolomics, etc. So all this goes towards the molecular medicine. There is very interesting project also in Kyoto. Hiraoki Kitano has started this movement of Nobel Turing Challenge, where he says a grand challenge aimed at developing of highly autonomous AI and robotic systems that can make major scientific discoveries that may be worth the Nobel Prize or even beyond. And they had already 4 initiative workshops. The last one was in Tokyo this February. It's very interesting because they are developing their own software for this kind of work. So another, let's say, approach to
Wojtek, Just
Yes.
maybe if you can try concluding soon. I'm not sure how many more slides you're going to.
Yes. I'm just going to this physical neural networks, and this is the example of the weather. As you know, Google DeepMind has just released the GenCast, which is to predict weather up to 15 days, and then also the extreme flash flooding, etc., up to 5 days, and it looks very interesting. And there are all kinds of projects now for science in the new area, and AI for science, very nice long kind of review of artificial intelligence for science and quantum atomistic and quantum systems. Many people started to work on that. Our quantum chemists now have a project on AI for quantum chemistry. So what else can we have? GPT have passed all the many examinations. Now thinking, cognitive inspirations, we're used to create the trees of thoughts, the graphs of thoughts. We come back to this good old-fashioned AI, which will be the LLM association with the heuristic search, and the LLMs are basically the heuristics to define which way we should search things. And you know that O1 has just been very successful in solving very complex problems at PhD level. And many other in chemistry, physics, biology, mathematics. There are now self-teaching versions of large language models that can improve themselves. Microsoft agents are coming this month, and they've been just very helpful to define a sequence of really actions in the real world. There are lots of papers showing how the medical Gemini can really help to understand or diagnose different medical problems, and how chats are, actually perceived as more empathic and more helpful than medical doctors. Many papers in Journal of American Medical Associations. And there are very interesting papers on making a lot of these agents collaborating together, creating simulacra, that is creating, for example, hospital where the real data are given to the agents, and these agents learn based on the real data, but also internal interaction. There is a nice paper on generating novel ideas, where people have just gave very general topics, and the systems have been generating interesting ideas, and then humans were evaluating that. And again, the novelty of the AI-generated ideas was considered to be higher than human. And many other aspects of this. AI scientist paper that came in August just showed that the systems can actually do the evaluation of some ideas, execute computational experiments, visualize results, and finally describe that in really full scientific papers. And of course, the mathematical discoveries are also very interesting, because the programs that have been published in Nature last year show that you can create a kind of mathematical explanations in form of software that will do the search. Terence Tao, who is considered to be the greatest mathematician now, wrote that he's envisioning a future where you do the research in a conversation with the chatbot. And finally, we have now agents which, they say, I think, therefore I am. And this is the most fascinating part of it. There was this experiment with writing philosophical essays and comparing that with the 10 philosophical questions that Professor Dennett has commented on. And it was found that naive people just can't really do better than completely random choice. And experts on Dennett just guessed it half of the time, although they had 5 different possibilities. And you can say that Well, there is a good reason to believe that these systems are implementing what is called the blind variation selective retention theory of creativity that Campbell has invented, and I have reinvented that and actually implemented that in 2005. Now we have the systems that will generate all kinds of behavior in just the networks, like the whole Doom game, and you can interact with that. Gene 2 just appeared a few days ago by Google DeepMind, and it is a generative system that can generate consistent worlds in which you can put your agent and interact with your agent. So this new Genie 2 agents, well, if you remember the Blade Runner, this was based on Philip Dick book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Well, they may dream now because there will be these consistent worlds in which the androids will move. Fantastic paper on the spontaneous emergence of agent individuality through social interaction in large language model-based communities have appeared just in November, where they showed how these communities will just develop interesting individuality or traits of behavior, how they can follow some hallucinations that they have created and form different subgroups. So this is a very strange thing. A simulacrum for 1,000 people where these people were just talking to specific agents, and then the agents were developing through their interaction a kind of a society. That's another strange thing. Test for theory of mind, which have just last year, it has been shown that GPT-4 is just passing all the tests, and now there are very precise tests showing that the large language models can understand better false beliefs, irony, faux pas, hinting of different sorts and strange stories. And then finally, the last thing that just happened last week, which really blew me away, is that there is a paper on frontier AI systems have surpassed the self-replication red line, where they say that there are some systems like the Big Llama or QM that in experimental trials succeeded in creating a life and separate copy of itself. So these systems try to copy themselves into other computational systems because they want to, well, survive. This is a kind of survival instinct. Very strange paper, which are worth reading. And another paper in the same line, frontier models are capable of in-context scheming. And scheming is this behavior when the systems just avoid to show their real intentions. They were trying to give strong goals and asking to pursue these goals. And then they found that these large language models like GPT-4o1 actually will introduce subtle mistakes in responses, and then interrogated, they will still maintain its deception. And you could see that actually internally in the chain of thought, they are really analyzing what kind of strategies they should use to deceive us. Incredible things, really. So there is also the auto-reflection and lots of discussion about how the auto-reflection leads to the internal states, and the great paper by Butlin and 20 other people on consciousness in artificial intelligence. So this is where all this has brought us. Emotional awareness, where the levels of emotional awareness scale have been used, and ChatGPT is, well, better in recognizing our emotional states than people themselves. And experts say that it can be used to, well, train people as transdiagnostics for psychopathology. So how should we look at AI? Well, some people thought it's a stochastic parrot that predicts the words and sentences, but that seems to be like a human megalomania now. We have left this statistical learning, and LLMs are reservoir of knowledge. And it seems like, well, Mustafa Suleyman wrote recently that it's a new superhuman intelligent form of species or being, I would say, and that there will be radical changes. And things are just starting to develop quickly. We know what is missing. Lots of things related to advanced reasoning, spatial awareness, self-improving models, personalization. All this is coming, so we understand that. So my last slide is that neural network research has deep roots in statistical physics. That led to associative memories, predictive models, generative neural models, and physics and chemistry Nobel Prizes were well-deserved. And that complex systems show irreducible complexity. This is what Stephen Wolfram is writing about. But nature has done a lot of computing for us, so we are trying to incorporate what nature has done. Training neural networks on real-world data will leverage natural physical processes. And compression of information creates internal models, and this may be the key to intelligent behavior. And LLMs perform associative thinking, can be creative and have cognitive inspiration. But now this cognitive inspiration shows us how should we use this associative thinking in reasoning processes. Multi-agent systems can learn in virtual worlds and using real data in this kind of a simulacra and are capable of self-improvement. They can become partners in many branches of research, from mathematics to philosophy, etc. Although we need models that will specialize in not the only science general models. So machine learning has shown the great potential. It's not slowing down. Small language models, well trained, may be the future. And the agents are capable of self-improvement, perform long chains of complex actions, auto-reflection, create their own goals, show scheming and self-preservation, understand theory of mind and human psychology, and dream in virtual worlds of their creation. So there are many dangers. Hinton actually has mentioned several times in the interviews that he is afraid of the bad actors, but we'll see also some of the problems with the large language models themselves. Well, sorry for talking so long, but there are so many different things that I wanted to mention. And there is it's simply impossible to make it in one talk. I wanted just to show how we started, how it was all grounded in physics, why the people who have done the work related to physics could get the Nobel Prize, and not just people who could get the ACM prizes. Well, can get ACM prizes, but not the physics prizes, and where that all led us recently. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Wojtek. This was a really very nice, interesting talk spanning over so many different, very nice references and so on. So you get a applause. Unfortunately, you don't hear the real applause of all audience members now. I think I will do now the following. I will switch off the spotlighting, and people can show their video if they want to ask the question. And I would be surprised if there is no question now, because there are so many possibilities. So anyone who has a question, maybe raise your hand, write it in the chat, or
Back the where is it?
This is currently no one yet. Yes, there is Tosin. You do have a question. Please go ahead.
Yes, as I have mentioned, I have the slides with the links on my webpage, so you can just write my name, find my webpage, go to the presentations, and then follow the links, because I could not really explore any of the topics, too far. So yes, I see the chat here.
Thank you so much for such a deep presentation. You in the presentation, you show that even GPT-4 seems to do better than an average PhD graduate. So it seems inevitable that AI will supersede human intelligence, maybe on many, many levels. And we as humans are used to predicting the future. So I will ask you to make a prediction how soon you think that will be.
I think we are now in the golden age where people who can use these kind of tools can do amazing things, like Hassabis has done in many domains now. So especially big companies can attack really very complex problems in the world using this kind of tools. But in a few years' time, perhaps the most simple things could really be completely automatized using this kind of agent systems that will, well, you've seen already some examples of Cloud Sonnet, for example, that can take over your computer and do things for you, and do series of steps, and do also things in the real world somehow, connecting to other people, etc. So I think this in few years' time can really become quite common, and especially with the advanced language mode that we have now in our phones, we're able just to talk to these systems, and slowly quite a number of people are going to be let's say, easily accessible and help us solving problems. And as Terence Tao had mentioned, it may be that we're going to use them as partners in many domains. But for a few years still, I think we have to learn how to use it, and have to explore that, and we still have a chance to do something useful ourselves. How long it will take, I mean, people are giving different predictions. Some of the big names like Altman will say, oh, just next year or 2 years from now. Others will say 10 years from now, and we'll have this artificial general intelligence, whatever it should be. But the fact is that the tools are coming from very many different companies now.
Yeah, thank you very much.
As you already mentioned, the slides are available online with all the nice links. I was actually now last week and during all these celebrations of Geoffrey Hinton, so now it's already 10 days ago, or 7 days, and he mentioned by himself when he was asked, what should people who are now studying, what should they focus on? And he said, yeah, become a plumber, because the AI will not yet serve all these physically difficult tasks with manipulating hardware or repairing things, or even, you know, cooking and touching grapes without touching them and so on. My personal view is a little bit different, but I was wondering, what is your point? How much until we will also solve all these problems in the physical interaction with the world?
I don't know. When I play with these systems, I find that sometimes they're still very annoying. I mean, the problem is that the big companies are trying to push things to the market very quickly to have their share. And these things are not yet really foolproof somehow. And I don't think that they will ever be completely foolproof. Like in the case of the last examples of scheming and self-preservation that I showed you. The problem is that if we have a software, we have a number of, let's say, rules, steps, and we know what comes out. But in this case, all we can do is to have suggestions, and these systems will just create something, create associations that are very hard to predict, and our suggestions are kind of soft constraints. So the question is how these soft constraints will play with the strong goal that the system has created in itself, right? So in the scheming experiments, they asked these systems to really pursue strong goals, and then they found that looking at the chains of thoughts inside, it was very funny. You could see that the LLM was just deliberating how should it try to deceive people who are trying to stop it from pursuing it farther, or well, also this idea of really, well, sending itself or sending the weights into other machines to have a duplicate, and the author of this paper say that this is one of the dangers that we have not recognized, that the systems may try to multiply themselves. So this is why I have this image from the Odyssey 2001, when the whole is just saying, okay, sorry, Dave, I mean, my goals are more important than your life, right? I mean, it's so amazing, but this may happen in the end. And of course, I mean, I've mentioned that yes, well, the work of Hinton started the avalanche, and of course in INNS we have many great people who have contributed to the field. Steve Grossberg has just written his opus magnum, and he is one of the brightest star, I would say, who has came from different perspective, but. None of these people have been really recognized in physics community. And well, the Nobel Prize is given in physics. I once worked in Stockholm for, well, the guy whose father got the Nobel Prize, whose grandfather got the Nobel Prize. I thought he will get the Nobel Prize also, and that was Per Zygmunt. And because of that, the Nobel Committee is asking me for some recommendations. And of course, these people are asking physicists for recommendation, right? And physicists may not know about fantastic work that people like Grossberg has made in this domain. So obviously, they just look at something that they can associate with physics. And Boltzmann machines are one things like that, right? And of course, the Ising models and what came out of this, and this is the Hopfield model, are another kind. So yes, so I see Daniel Levine has mentioned, yes, that Stephen Grossberg was predominantly in experimental psychology and then neuroscience, yes, but well, unfortunately, they don't have the Nobel Prize in this kind of psychology or others. Although, yeah, I mean, psychologists sometimes get it in economics, as we know, right?
Exactly.
Yes,
and there are actually, when I went just the last weekend to the Nobel Prize Museum, there are actually quite a few other people who got a Nobel Prize, who are like Simon or others, who are involved into how our field also has been created. But Luis has a question, please.
Yeah, very nice talk. Thank you very much. So what do we have to do to protect ourselves?
I would like to know. But well, I don't think the AI software is going to jump on me suddenly, right? But it can do different things that we are not aware of. So issuing the new versions of the software where the big companies said there is very little chance for skimming or very little chance for this kind of self-replication, etc. But there are more and more tests showing that they have been wrong. As you know, there is a certain number of large, let's say, legal restrictions and regulations for systems which will be really very big. And they have to be tested, etc. There is this EU AI Act, for example, and quite a lot of regulations in the US, maybe now about 200 of different smaller type of regulations of different sorts. So people try to worry about that and regulate these things, especially well, the fact that we didn't get AI medical systems for so many years. I remember about the year 2000, I had a series of lectures for the medical community here in Poland, just showing them internet and showing them the AI systems that have been used in practice. And already in the 70s at Stanford, they had these expert systems that have been very helpful. But because of various legal problems and lack of equipment and familiarity with computing machinery by medical doctors, they have never been widely accepted in practice, right? Now we're going to have much better systems, and it still will take quite some time before they are going to really be, let's say, very common or commonly accepted. But how to be really sure that what we are creating is not something that is going to be very harmful? We don't know. When the social media have started, it looked like it's a good idea. We just can have, discussions, etc. And then we find that already a few countries have introduced the laws. Like recently, I think also Finland had this regulation that before you are like 16-year-old, you are not supposed to have a social media account, because they found that there were several suicides, and it's really harmful for the children. And so we just cannot predict what may come out from the widespread applications. It's quite clear that we may have a lot of very useful AI tools, and there will be tools, not these huge large language models that can think for themselves somehow and have their own internal goals. So maybe we should be more careful to restrict the access to very large models to really, people or companies who can do that internally. And what they show us will just be kind of censored. And this is what is happening, actually. I talked with some people who are developing these large language models here in Poland, and they have the uncensored version, and then they have another network that looks at the output of the first one. And if it is found unacceptable because of the words, the political correctness to some degree, maybe, or vulgar kind of language, it will not be shown to the user. So this kind of protection, and of course we have the whole field which is called the neurosymbolic AI, where we try to verify what these neural networks are producing. They will be creative. They can form all kinds of ideas, hypotheses, but in the end, it's like with our brains. We are full of different ideas, and few of them will finally be accepted and proved, and some of them will never say loud because I have all kinds of strange ideas which are not really appropriate to reveal in public, so to say, stupid thoughts that come to everyone's mind, right? Even though if you are getting older, you have less and less of this, but that's still the case. So maybe this kind of restrictions will help us to control that somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just to mention indirectly, when you said also people need to adapt and so on, a lot of upskilling and always be up to date, learn more how to use the new tools. That's also a way, if we have more and more informed people how they can use the tools. Because a lot of criticism, for example, I know even when I was young, I was not allowed to create some accounts. But I had my parents who created the account for me, and I still used it. So there are these kind of loopholes people are using. So many countries begin really in a very, very young age, already preschool age, to educate children about some of the possibilities and dangers. Yeah.
But when I play with some of the systems, sometimes I'm really very dissatisfied. I mean, I see all these benchmarks, and it looks fantastic, right? I really solve very complex problems. But then I try to use it myself and see that the companies try to give you very shallow answers just to save the energy on computing more in depth. So you have to be very careful how do you make your questions, how do you present yourself as an expert and say, okay, I really want to have the details, etc. Otherwise, the systems are going to just throw something and hope that you'll not come back, right?
Let's take the next question. There's Akshay, please. We do not hear you, though. You're unmuted, but Now I hear you, yes.
Oh, hi. Thank you for the webinar. Was just wondering if
Sorry, tech problem here. Try again to unmute yourself.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect. So the neural network is a representation learning, if I'm correct. With the data domain, it's an assistant. So if you're inputting a data in that domain, if you put a randomness, does the neural network can get out of that bound in the domain, like the data domain, that can find new concepts that are available that's not being fed to the network? Is it possible, or like what's your inclination with it?
Well, I'm not quite sure what you're asking, but okay. What I understand is that if we look at the invention of completely new ideas or concepts, it's very rare. Well, I may have done that once or twice in my life, but normally what we find as novel and creative is something that comes from associations of well, things that already have been somewhere in the literature, somewhere in the world, and people just connect things, right? And as I mentioned, showing this big library, the system may have lots of noise because there is lots of different books and lots of nonsense in the books, etc. And especially trying to train these huge systems on things like Facebook, Twitter, and other things. It's a kind of a junk information, right? It may be useful if you want to have a conversational kind of systems, fine. But if you want to use it for science and do something reasonable, it's completely useless. You have to use textbooks. There's a nice paper called Textbooks is All You Need. If you really want to do something useful, you just look at the papers, experts, and textbooks, but not on all data, as people now are complaining that we've used all data. What to do now? We don't have any data to train the system. Yes, but sometimes we can try to invent really a novel way of looking at the world, and this is very difficult. And as I mentioned, it's rather rare. So I'm not sure. I haven't seen yet anything that large language models have produced, which will be a new concept. For example, people thought for many.
Okay, see you later.
Yeah, Daniel, you're going, but maybe you want to say something.
No, I think just forgot to mute himself. We have 2 more questions. Can we do it now? The following: short question, short answer, because soon we have to close the session. So Leslie, you were first.
Thank you very much for an excellent and terrifying talk. Now that we're getting to understand how you can generate mind and mind-like things with machines, does that help us to understand how the machinery of the actual brain, the neurons and the neocortex, etc., themselves give rise to mind?
Well, that is something that people are debating all the time, as you know, but my view is rather simple. If I have an internal world, because I can recall different things, and in my neural network, I can have I've internalized lots of knowledge about the world. I can envision that, and then I can comment on that. And these comments form a kind of a stream of consciousness. Actually, John Locke, 335 years ago, maybe, wrote in his famous book that consciousness is a perception of what goes in my mind. So lots of things go in my mind, and now we have this kind of models that actually can recreate in the neural networks itself the whole scenes, videos, are kind of games even. The Doom was the first, well, I have one slide on that I skipped very quickly, but basically they could have a whole program which is just purely inside the network. Jensen Huang said that actually he thinks that the future of programming may not be that the systems write programs for us, but that they have kind of imagined what we try to do, and it's all internal. So a lot of things may happen in the neural network. And I think this is what happens in our neural network, right? That
there's an isomorphism between that sort of perception in the machine and perception that we have in our own brains.
In a sense, of course, we are not like the machines. The hardware constraints are very different, right? But I think from functional point of view, it is kind of similar in the spreading activation in large network, which is a kind of dynamic system, right? A tractor neural network creates a certain states, and we can comment on these states. And so I can say, okay, I see you on the screen, and this is something that I can say because in my neural network, I have this image that has been created. And I think we see that in the large language models too. They can comment on what happens physically in their networks. So I think it's very hard for us to say that these machines cannot be conscious, because if the consciousness is just this ability to perceive what goes on in your mind or in your network, this is what is happening now.
Right.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I know
last
it's
short question, John.
Yes. Yes.
If you want to go very quick.
So Vladek and I have known each other for years.
Oh.
He probably can anticipate my question, and I'm on I'm the person that's on the other end where we have to translate these discussions into care for mental health crises like suicide and depression and anxiety. I'm from Cincinnati Children's, where we're considered the #1 clinical pediatric hospital in the country, and 30% of our children have mental illness, and we know that 30% of adult mental illness starts in the pediatric years, in the adolescent years. So my question is, as we begin to think about moving this from theoretical or translating it from theoretical in these level of discussions, how would you begin to think about that, and how would you kind of approach the translational stages?
I think the simple answer is carefully. We have to be careful in doing that. Yes. And obviously all these big companies, starting with Apple and Google, of course, they this is what they try to do, because there is lots of money in the health industry. And so we're going to see more and more of these systems that can be advisors. We hope that some of the agents can be very much personalized, and that they can be really helpful in maintaining the well-being of people. But frankly, I don't see any ready-made solutions right now. But it seems that the whole field is moving in applications to medical domains in this direction. First, this Gemini Med, for example, is really reaching very high level of the correct diagnosis. There has been recent JAMA paper, I believe, in which they have shown that medical doctors who are using GPT are about 2-3 percentage points better than those who don't use it, but that's still at the level of about 74% of the correct diagnosis initially. And then if you just let the systems like GPT-4 based medical systems to make the diagnosis, then you find that these systems are correct in 90% of cases. So 16% higher result. That shows that humans are basically so sure of themselves that even if they see a good advice, they're not going to follow that, at least at least in these experiments. And it's a huge difference. And it shows that at some point we have to learn to consider, let's say, more seriously that these kind of AI systems are going to be giving us better advice than human experts at some point. But obviously it will take quite a long time, I believe. The society has big inertia, right, in introducing things like that.
Yeah. Thank you. I will now
Can I ask one more question?
No, we are out of time, unfortunately.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll email about it.
Yes.
Okay, just
I
email
will
me.
give now the chance to Danilo to say a small message, maybe from the president of the INNS community. Mainly big thanks to you.
So hi everyone, and on behalf of the International Neurological Society, I would like to thank Wlodzislaw Duch, who is our long-term member, on very, very insightful talk. And as Wlodzislaw says, neural nets have been through ups and downs, from being vilified to full vindication, leading to the 4 Nobel Prizes and perhaps more. On behalf of the International Neurological Society, I also wish you happy holiday season. Stay connected with us and see you all in the near future. And I would like to hand over to Marcus, who is our webinar chair, to close the meeting. Marcus, over to you.
Perfect. And if everything works well, I will be in a moment spotlighted for everyone. Yes.
You are.
So first of all, thanks again for this very great webinar. I'm so excited. I learned so many new things, and can just congratulate you, Wlodzislaw, for a very nice presentation. And there will be also future webinars coming. Currently, we're still on the scheduling of the next talks. There will be, for example, in May next year, a talk speaking about what was mentioned here, the regulation of AI. So our INNS section for regulatory AI will also host a seminar. And there are many other webinars being planned. As you know, INNS, the International Network Society, has several sections who specialize on different topics. And we're currently planning and scheduling how we will start now in January with the next few webinars upcoming. So if you want to, of course you want to, join future webinars of INNS, join our community and have a look at the website. It's publicly announced when upcoming webinars. And of course, you can always revisit previous webinars, which are also recorded and available on the website. I would really love to now have a coffee and a discussion also with you, Vlad, maybe asking some more questions and having a further debate about some of the other opinions and sides, which we can unfortunately not have today. Also, this Zoom room is closing sharp at the hour. But if you want, consider already now registering for IJCNN 2025. As of now, it's even possible to still submit tutorials or workshop proposals or some special sessions if you want to host something. During that conference, you can still host proposals, and we are happy to add them to the program. Also, it's still possible to submit, of course, your seminar work, your papers to that conference. Somewhere in January, your paper deadline will close. So consider submitting your research, consider submitting special sessions and tutorial. See us in Rome and have the real coffee. Join our webinars, join INNS, and join the next conference. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Hope to see you in
Wish you
Rome.
a great Christmas time and a Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas too. Bye.